Hey everyone, welcome back to Bear It in Mind. Are you ready to revise psychopathology together? Grab some paper, a pen, and let's see how much you know. This is a test yourself style video where we'll strengthen your knowledge until you know this topic inside out. I'll ask you questions, give you time to think, and then reveal the answers. But don't just sit and watch, actively engage. Pause the video and think. Say your answers out loud. Write things down. The more effort you put in, the more you'll remember. But don't worry, it's totally okay if you get things wrong. In fact, that's the best way to figure out what you need to work on, and you can watch this video and test yourself as many times as you need until you get them all right. You can find a full series of videos on the Bear It in Mind YouTube channel for the psychopathology topic that goes into each part in depth, and there's a summary video of the whole topic which is all linked below for you. And if you want more help with your revision to study smarter and save you time, you can join Bear It in Mind, where you'll find a variety of resources from interactive quizzes, exam paper walkthrough videos, exemplar answers and much more, and the link for that is also in the description. Alright, let's dive in and test ourselves on the psychopathology topic. The first thing we always need to do is have the big picture of the topic to know how it all fits together. So psychopathology can be broken down into 4 sections. Do you know what they are? Write them down now. Psychopathology is broken down into the definitions of abnormality, phobias, depression, and OCD. Now let's categorise each of those sections further. Can you name each of the definitions of abnormality? You don't have to define them at this point, just name them. The 4 definitions are statistical infrequency, deviation from social norms, failure to function adequately, and deviation from ideal mental health. Next, phobias, depression, and OCD nicely break down further. What are the 3 parts of each of these? For each of phobias, depression, and OCD, you need to know the characteristics, which includes behavioural, emotional, and cognitive characteristics, the explanations, and the treatments. Now on the specification, phobias, depression, and OCD are each considered from one approach. Can you remember which approach is the focus for phobias, for depression, and for OCD? For phobias, it's a behavioural approach, for depression, it's a cognitive approach, and for OCD, it's a biological approach. So finally, can you name the behavioural explanation and treatments for phobias? Can you name the cognitive explanations and treatment for depression? Can you name the biological explanations and treatment for OCD? So how did you do? What was your score? Which headings and sections did you not know and now need to practice? Always start here, get this right first, and then dive into the details. Now that we've categorised the topic, let's test our understanding of each section in turn, starting with the definitions. We'll now take each definition in turn, then I'll give you some quick-fire multiple choice questions later. Let's take statistical infrequency first. Can you tell me how someone might be defined as abnormal according to this definition, and can you give me an example? Let's check your answer. Did you write down that statistical infrequency is about a behaviour being rare or statistically uncommon? For something more advanced, did you talk about a normal distribution, a bell-shaped curve, where the vast majority of the scores are in the middle, but the extreme scores, the anomalies, are on the edge? To be statistically abnormal is to be 2 standard deviations away from the mean. For example, IQ, the average is 100, so to have an IQ of below 70 or above 130 would be statistically infrequent. Next, deviation from social norms. Write down now how someone could be defined as abnormal according to this definition and give an example. Let's check your answer. Did you write something like, if someone behaves in a way that significantly differs from the accepted standards, values or expectations of their society or culture? For example, talking to yourself in public, while some private self-talk is normal, openly having conversations with yourself in public might be considered strange. Next, failure to function adequately. Write down now how someone could be defined as abnormal according to this definition and give an example. Did you write something like this? It refers to someone who is unable to cope with the demands of everyday life. Rosenhan and Seligman suggested characteristics of those failing to function adequately, including personal distress and irrationality. For example, struggling to hold down a job due to severe anxiety, or being unable to maintain basic hygiene and self-care due to depression. Finally, deviation from ideal mental health. Write down now how someone could be defined as abnormal according to this definition. Did you write down any of Marie Jehoida's criteria? Time to revise how to evaluate these definitions. On the screen are 8 evaluative points, 1 strength and 1 limitation for each definition. First, can you match up the evaluative points with each definition? Here's how they match up. One at a time, let's take each evaluation point to see how well you really understand it. The evaluative point will appear on the screen and you need to do 3 things. Number 1, identify which definition it applies to. Number 2, identify if it's a strength or a limitation of that definition. And number 3, state a heading for that evaluation point like I used on the matching task a moment ago. For example, if this appeared, you would write down deviation from social norms, a strength, and flexible. That's the definitions of abnormality, but here comes a quick fire round in 60 seconds with multiple choice questions. Next, phobias, and here we start with the characteristics. Remember, you need to know the behavioural, emotional and cognitive characteristics, in other words, what people do, feel and think. I'll say a characteristic and you decide if it's behavioural, emotional or cognitive. Panic, selective attention, anxiety. Next, can you name one more characteristic for each? Now we move on to the explanation of phobias, and remember the focus is on a behavioural explanation. Do you remember it from when we categorised the topic earlier? What's it called? It's called the 2-process model. So now can you name the 2 processes and how they explain phobias? The first process is how phobias are acquired through classical conditioning, learning through association. This means that a person has associated a neutral stimulus with an unconditioned stimulus, which leads to the unconditioned response of fear. The previously neutral stimulus now triggers fear and becomes a conditioned stimulus. The second process is how phobias are maintained through operant conditioning. Once the phobia is established, it is maintained through avoidance behaviour. When an individual avoids the feared object or situation, they experience relief from anxiety, which negatively reinforces the avoidance behaviour. Now we need to be able to evaluate the behavioural explanation of phobias. So, can you name any supporting evidence? And can you state how it can be practically applied to help people? And can you compare the behavioural explanation of phobias with a biological and cognitive explanation? Now let's do a quick review. On the screen is everything we've covered about phobias up to this point, but I've blanked out certain parts. Can you identify what's missing? Well done, you're doing great. Last part of phobias, then on to depression. The final part is the behavioural treatment for phobias. Can you recall what part is missing here from systematic desensitization? Can you recall what is missing here from flooding? Let's now evaluate these behavioural treatments of phobias to wrap up this section. Do you know any supporting evidence, particularly for systematic desensitization? Can you compare systematic desensitization and flooding in any ways? And can you compare the behavioural treatments with biological treatments? Here's your next quick fire round, 60 seconds multiple choice questions on phobias. And breathe, we're halfway through. Now next to test ourselves on depression. I'll say a characteristic and you decide if it's behavioural, emotional or cognitive. Negative thoughts, lowered mood, lack of energy and pleasure in activities. Can you name one more characteristic for each? Now we move on to explanations of depression, and remember, the focus is on a cognitive explanation. As a reminder, the focus of the cognitive approach is on the way we think. So the reason why people are depressed, according to these theories, is because of their irrational thoughts. Do you remember the two explanations for depression from when we categorised the topic earlier? First up is Aaron Beck and his cognitive theory of depression, and second there is Albert Ellis and his ABC model of depression. Very helpfully, each theory has three parts to them. Can you name the three parts? Beck's cognitive triad theory explains depression through three key elements: negative self-schemas, cognitive distortions, and the negative triad. Ellis's ABC model explains depression by focusing on how irrational thoughts influence emotions and behaviour, and the model consists of an activating event, beliefs, and consequences. Let's test ourselves on Beck's theory now. Write down what each of the three parts of the theory mean. Next, let's test ourselves on Ellis's theory. Write down what each of the three parts of the theory mean. Now we need to be able to evaluate the cognitive explanation of depression. We can use the same questions and evaluative points as for the explanations of phobias to make your life simpler. So can you name any supporting evidence? How can it be practically applied? And can you compare it with a biological explanation? And additionally, can you explain what it means that it blames the patient rather than the situation? The final part is the cognitive treatment of depression. Do you remember this from when we categorised the topic earlier? It's called cognitive behavioural therapy. On the screen I'm going to show you how CBT works according to Ellis, but can you identify the missing parts here? On the screen I'm going to show you how CBT works according to Beck, but can you identify the missing parts? Now let's do another quick review. On the screen is everything we've covered about depression up to this point, but I've blanked out certain parts. Can you identify what's missing? Let's now evaluate the cognitive treatment of depression to wrap up this section. Do you know any supporting evidence for CBT? Can you compare the cognitive treatment with other treatments? And here comes another quick fire round, 60 seconds, multiple choice questions on depression. Great work, 3/4 of the way there. OCD next. I'll say a characteristic and you decide if it's behavioural, emotional or cognitive. Obsessive, persistent thoughts, anxiety and distress, compulsions and repetitive behaviours. And can you name one more characteristic for each? Now we move on to the explanations of OCD, and remember the focus is on a biological explanation. Do you remember the two explanations for OCD from when we categorised the topic earlier? They are the genetic and neural explanations. Can you describe the genetic explanation for OCD? And can you describe a neural explanation for OCD, specifically the role of neurotransmitters? And can you describe a neural explanation for OCD, this time with the worry circuit? Now we need to be able to evaluate the biological explanations of OCD, and just like before, we can use the same questions and evaluative points we've done for the previous explanations to make your life simpler. So can you name any supporting evidence for the genetic explanation and for the neural explanation? And how can it be practically applied And can you explain how biological and environmental explanations can be combined? Now let's do another review. On the screen is everything we've covered about OCD up to this point, but I've blanked out certain parts. Can you identify what's missing? Last part, here we go, finish strong. The final part is the biological treatment of OCD and drug therapy. One drug used to treat OCD are called SSRIs. Do you know what that stands for, and can you explain how they work? Let's now evaluate the biological treatment of OCD to wrap up this section. Do you know any supporting evidence for drug therapy? Do you know any of the negatives of drug therapy? And can you compare the biological treatment with other treatments? Here's your final quickfire round, 60 seconds, multiple choice questions on OCD. And here's the final challenge. On the screen are the names of the studies we have revised in this topic, but can you remember which part of psychopathology they relate to and what they did? Congratulations, you've done it! How did you do? Did you score 60% or lower? Well, no worries, go back and watch some of the videos on the playlist to fill in the gaps of your knowledge. 80% or more? Well, great job! You just need to focus on the specific areas where you lost some marks. Or if you're up for taking your revision to the next level, dive into some exam paper walkthroughs over at the Bear It In Mind website. I hope you found this video helpful, and we'll see you in the next one.